This picture here is of Russian troops, Russian soldiers marching off to the front. This presentation we're going to do now is on the Battle of Tannenberg and the Russian invasion of East Prussia, which was a Russian victory. Now sometimes people can get the idea that in World War I, Russia didn't have any victories, and the Germans were always beating the Russians, which during the latter part of the war, that was most of the times the case. However, early on in the war, the Russians actually experienced many successes, and the Germans were actually falling behind terribly. As the Germans were invading Belgium, the Russians were invading Germany, and this was ahead of schedule for Germany. The Germans didn't think that the Russians would be able to mobilize their army, which had millions of men in it, in time before that they were be able to come on and sweep them off the battlefield. But they got ahead of the Russians got on the battlefield ahead of schedule and really messed up the Germans' plans. This map shows the Russian invasion into East Prussia. Poland actually didn't exist. It was divided between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia. And East Prussia was the German portion. The Russians invaded, but were eventually defeated. One of their armies was defeated by the Germans at Tannenberg under Samsonov. The other was eventually forced to retreat. However, throughout the course of the war, especially the early part of the war, much of the early part of the war would be fought near East Prussia, and the Russians were even at the borders of Silesia in eastern Germany, in which they could go to both Berlin, and also they could move on into Vienna, Austria. So, as you can see, the Russians were really getting quite close to the heart of the Central Powers. However, the German victory at Tannenberg, which was named after another battle that was fought in the Middle Ages, the Battle of Tannenberg, that eventually saved Germany for the time being, and Germany and the Central Powers were saved for a little bit. However, the Russians continued to fight in enemy territory, and it was not until a couple years later down the road when actually the tide turned, and this time Germans and Austro-Hungarians were invading Russia. And so the Russians were enjoying some early successes in the war against the Germans and Austro-Hungarians in their invasion of East Prussia. However, it all was flipped upside down at Tannenberg, and their advance was halted.